Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about The Ice Dragon by George R. R. Martin, Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan, Solaris by Stanis Law Lem, and Ubik by Philip K. Dick. So I'm starting out with the two shorter stories. So first, The Ice Dragon by George R. R. Martin. This little novella was first published in 1980, so keep in mind this was 16 years before A Game of Thrones, and yet it's in the same universe as A Song of Ice and Fire. We follow winter child Adara, who bonds with the legendary ice dragon. Adara was born in one of the coldest winters that anyone can remember, and as a result of that, maybe she tends to be somewhat immune to the cold. She enjoys spending long hours outside playing in the snow, building snow castles, which freeze overnight into ice castles, playing with ice lizards, and then she ends up bonding with a dragon, with an ice dragon. And meanwhile, war is brewing on the horizon. This book is surprisingly accessible to, I would say, young adult readers as well as adult readers. It's a very simple tale, but it's beautifully written, it's fun, it's adventurous. I would say this is a tale of pride, for better or worse, courage, bravery, home, being rooted in who you are. And I picked this up because I enjoyed the Dunk and Egg novella so much, so I was interested in reading more from this world. And I didn't really know much about this book going into it, but I had a really good time and highly recommend it if you want a good short read. Small Things Like These was published in 2021 and it won the Booker Prize in 2022. In this story, we follow Bill Furlong, who's a coal merchant. It's Christmas time in a small Irish town in 1985. Bill is delivering an order to a convent when along the way he notices at the convent that there is the horrific treatment of women being used for labor there, and this deeply weighs on his conscience. It causes him to reflect on his present, his privilege, the fact that he's able to support a family of 5 daughters and a beautiful wife he loves, and it also causes him to reflect on his past and how he wouldn't be where he is today if not for the generosity of others, for the help of others, specifically a Protestant widow who hired Bill's mother as a maid and helped him get an education. So he can't help but think about these small things. I think this novella is a great examination of the Good Samaritan effect. If you don't know what the Good Samaritan effect is, that's when if you're passing a stranger on the street who's in need, would you stop and help them? Chances are, if you're in a hurry, you'll find ways to rationalize why you can't stop and help that person. There are other factors that can affect that as well, but I think that this story is a great critical examination of that question. Not only is Bill in a rush to get his order completed and to get things done by Christmas time, but there's also the power imbalance of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has a lot of power in this Irish town. And is he willing to confront that? Is he willing to defy that to help these women? So there's a lot that's at stake there. There's a really good moral question at stake there, anyway. And I would say that this particular story delivered on that question. It really brings you in touch with that time and that setting. It has great subtext and dialogue. And while I would say the story does have heart to it, I do not think this is a sentimental story. I think this story has a little bit of a bite to it. It's very appropriate that it's set at Christmas time. And I actually intended to, I had the audiobook. I intended to listen to this around Christmas time and I totally forgot. But I think it's good that it is set at Christmas time because, as Bill says in the story, Christmas brings out the best and worst in people. The purpose of this is not to offer a big plot twist, it's just to twist your conscience a little bit with small things. Notice the little ways we turn away from hardship when it comes to other people. Notice if our values, if they align with our actions. So that's all I have to say for this very short story, but I think it's well worth reading, even if it's not Christmas time when you pick it up. Now to talk about Solaris by Stanis Law Lem. This I buddy read with Murphy and had the best time. It was so much fun to talk back and forth about the themes, the intrigue of the story. This particular story is about a planet that has an ocean that covers most of the planet, and the ocean is noted for being a unified cellular field that's able to morph into these vivid Earth-like structures. There is question as to whether this planet is conscious or not. There's a lot of questions about consciousness and matter, whether the two coincide or are different, about consciousness and thinking. And I feel like these questions are still intriguing today, even though this was brought up in 1961. We still don't really have a full grasp of what consciousness is. There is still a lot of question about that. There's still a lot of question about what a thought exactly is. But we understand this particular planet through Chris Kelvin, who's a psychologist who ends up landing at the station. The station is what hovers way above the planet. He's there at this space station with two other scientists. And what they find is that this planet is able to perhaps communicate with them. There's uncertainty about that. It's able to present these guests. The guests turn out to be clones of memories. For example, with Chris, his guest is the clone formation of his wife who died 10 years prior to him arriving at the planet. And the clone is the vivid representation of her. Now, the story was very interesting to follow from Chris's perspective, and he does have a lot of changes, drastic changes in his emotional perspective of things. So that was interesting to follow from a purely psychological perspective. But there are also these info dump chapters. That's how I describe them. There are these chapters in the story that give you a lot of scientific background. They're kind of written like old fashioned scientific reports of the planet of Solaris and all the field of research that has gone into the planet over the last few decades. And when I read these particular chapters, I knew right away that there was no way I was going to commit to memory all the taxonomy, all of the periods of research, all the names of the scientists. I knew that that wasn't really the purpose, was to memorize all these facts. I think that it was just written that way as a signal to the reader that there's been research here, scientists have been on it, they've been trying to figure this out and grapple with this for a long time. And I think it also highlighted some of the themes as well. And one of the themes being that we as humans are always going to be susceptible to anthropomorphizing other non humanoid forms of consciousness. Now, keep in mind that as of 2012, just 12 years ago, there was a Cambridge Declaration of Consciousness which accepted that non humans could be conscious, so animals could be conscious. Before 2012, it seemed to me like a general idea or theory floating around was that animals were not conscious. And this declaration was the understanding that, yes, they're not conscious the same way that humans are conscious, but it's still consciousness. And this book is pointing that critical viewpoint out that a lot of times when we think of something as conscious, we're only looking at it from a human lens. So I really liked that this book explored that particular theme and also brought forth through those chapters, through those scientific report chapters, this idea that humans cannot let go of what it can't grasp. We as humans have to understand things, and that that's its own form of conquest. Also related to our anthropocentrism, there's this idea that going out into space, we're trying to look for this idealized version of ourselves reflected back at ourselves. But contact really is all about looking at the deeper, darker aspects of our psyche, that's what these clone memories represent. And in that way, it reminded me a bit of In Ascension, the other book that I buddy read with Murphy recently. And we learned, of course, that this was an influence in that book for that author. The ending of this story was one of my favorite kinds of endings in a book. It just touched all the right notes for me personally. It had the right level of ambiguity and wonder and closure. It was excellent. I enjoyed that quite a bit. I would say that the tone of this story, it borders on the psychological horror and surreal wonder of a consciousness exploration in space. So if that sounds intriguing to you, I highly recommend it. Ubik by Philip K. Dick. This book was published in 1969. It takes place in a future 1992, so future when it was written, obviously past to us, and not quite accurate to the 1992 that we knew, but it is such a fun story. In this story, we have a corporation of anti-psychics that's run by a man named Glenn Brunseter, and he has a whole team working with him, including a young bachelor, Joe Chip. Joe is probably the main character of the story. He's a bachelor, not very high achieving, not very good with money. He lives in a very messy apartment that's all coin operated. He doesn't even have enough coins to get through the door. And this whole corporation ends up under this conspiratorial trap that ends up in some strange phenomena occurring, including Glenn Runseter's face appearing on coins. And Joe is left with the team trying to solve this mystery of what's happening. As for the title and the spray cans, that's something that is definitely a key part of this mystery as you read on. And you will see little entrances to chapters that have descriptions of Ubik, little advertisement descriptions of Ubik. It doesn't give you a lot of heavy exposition. You do get grounded with some key points of information at the beginning with Rensselaer. He's talking to his wife, who is in this facility where they keep half dead people. And so he's able to communicate with her through that. And he's giving her an update on what's happening with his corporation and his rival corporation. But other than that, you're not left knowing a whole lot about what's going on or how psychic hacking works. All that's not very detailed. I had such a fun time with this story. I thought it was so well crafted for something that was just under 130 pages. I enjoyed Dick's writing style quite a bit. I feel like he had a very distinct writing style. The characters were characterized by their very zany clothing. There was good contrast between their personalities, good banter back and forth. It was just a fun, moving story. I think with all the weird things that were happening, the weird mystery in the plot, there were a lot of surreal things happening in the story, but our character, Joe Chip, our bachelor, he made me feel very grounded in the story. And I feel like I was able to follow along pretty well through his mindset. It's not in first person narration, but he is, like I said, the main person we follow. While the themes and the concepts of the book might have seemed far fetched for 1992, in reality, I don't think they're that far fetched now. This idea of psychic hacking, it might have seemed like fantasy so many years ago, but I think there's technology that is starting to go that direction, if not already gone that direction. So I don't think it's that far fetched anymore. And even this idea about capitalism, corporations, everything being automated or coin operated, it just made me think of things as simple as checkout stands at grocery stores, self checkout stands, or gas pumps that you could just put your credit card into. There are a lot of things like that that do exist in the modern age. The one thing I would say that I was a little critical of, that you can't help but notice, especially as a female reader, is the portrayal of women in this story. Women either being really young and hot or being over 40 and not attractive at all. I also noticed the statement, "so it goes," come up quite a bit. It made me think right away of Slaughterhouse-Five, which was published the same year, so I don't think the books were referencing each other, but it was just interesting to notice that. So I got a lot out of this story. I could honestly keep talking about it, but obviously I have to keep it spoiler-free for this video. Let me know if you've read it or if you're planning to read it. It's a strange book, hard to recommend in some ways, but glad I got to it. And that is it for this video. Those are the 4 books I'm talking about in this video. Right now I'm reading The Dying Earth by Jack Vance, so I may or may not talk about this in a review type of video. I am planning to do a Q1 recap in the near future, so I might talk about it then. But in the meantime, please let me know what you're reading, if you've read any of the books I've mentioned, if you're planning to read any of the books I've mentioned, and thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.